All right, Sergio, we have Katie Wells coming on, author of Disrupting DC, The Rise of Uber and the Fall of the City. Katie, welcome. How are you doing?
It's great to be here. Thanks, Chris.
How are you, Katie?
Sergio, I'm good today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Now that you're here, I'm doing better. I actually wanted to talk to you for a long time. I mean, I've known you for a while, obviously, but I wanted to have you on the show and then the timing worked out so well, right? That a lot of stuff is going on. A lot of settlements are happening, like New York City, and a lot of legislation is brewing around the country. Well, who better than talk to you? But then let's first introduce yourself, obviously. And then let's talk a little bit about your wonderful book, Disrupting DC, The Rise of Uber and the Fall of the City, right? So let's do that.
Let's do that. That sounds great. So my name is Katie Wells. I am a geographer, which still is like a career, it turns out, in the United States. I'm a geographer, a researcher at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., but I'm from Northeast Ohio. So this is a bit of fantasy land in D.C. And I've been researching the gig economy for about 8 years. I had a babysitter take an Uber home one night, and she lived 5 blocks away from me, and it cost $5. And being sort of the researcher that I am, I thought, how does this work? Who does this work for? How is this feasible, right, at scale? And so that sort of began sort of a deep dive into what does it mean for cities when Uber comes to town.
And what did it mean for DC when Uber came to town?
It wasn't as dreamy as it did not look like. Do you guys remember Spike Lee, how he did those videos, the Brooklyn Hustle, right? It didn't look like that. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't pretty. What we argue in the book, what we found, which I honestly still hope is not true, although I'm an empiricist, and so I haven't found the counter evidence. What we found is that Uber is not evidence of urban economic strength or innovation, but instead its entry into cities is often a sign of weakness, desperation, and a really low set of expectations about how urban life should look.
Yeah, I mean, I read the book, obviously, and you know, the first chapter talks about that, but you know, without going too much into detail, what I want you to talk a little bit about is that other than your findings in the book, because this book is not just about drivers versus Uber versus passengers, it's not much to do with that, but it has a lot to do with how Uber's playbook is, right? How do they play this game? Do you think they play fair and nice, or how do they play this game?
No, Sergio. However, so here's DC, what we didn't expect, right? There is a good chapter, Sergio, on the 40 workers we follow for 5 years as they move on and off the app. But you're right. The book actually gets stuck in all the city politics around how is it that these policymakers got in bed with Uber, right? This book is not a hit piece on Uber. It's a hit piece on all of us who got in bed with them. We're willing to allow it to make sense for their lives, whether you're workers or policymakers or consumers. And so DC became testing ground. A lot of what we saw play out in California with Prop 22, or what we're watching in Massachusetts, or what just unfolded in Minnesota this year, right? There were trial runs of that in DC in 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, and we try to document that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, you know, to me, as being an insider of this gig world, right, their playbook is very clear to me. Okay, I mean, may not be some for some other people, but our job is to educate our audience and then have them expect what's coming, because I kind of see what's about to happen before it happens, and you see that too, obviously, when you're doing, you know, researching your book. You see all this happening, and then, you know, sometimes we know it's wrong, but then as our audience may attest to, I feel like, as large as we are as a channel, I feel powerless.
Yeah.
Like, I know what's happening in Minneapolis. I know what's happening in California. And then now, you know, it's tied up in court, going to Supreme Court, Prop 22 in California. But this is their playbook. They're going to play this book. They're going to play their hand. What do you say about that? I mean, how do we resist this? How do we get together and make sure it doesn't happen?
Yeah. I mean, Sergio, I feel the same way, right? Like, their playbook is to challenge the idea of regulation as a good. Their idea is to say, actually, I remember interviewing one of their lobbyists for DC, and he's like, you know what? Like, the reason DC is such a good model for us early on is because they adopted our worldview. And I was like, oh, like, what's your worldview? And they're like, oh, we do regulation better, right? The idea that a private entity gets to decide the rules of the game. And right, that's their whole mantra. And they've done it beautifully. And they've convinced a whole bunch of powerful people, right, that it's a reasonable stance. So how do we resist? Honestly, I think things like Show Me the Money Club, right, are part of that. One of the shocking things about this work that I didn't expect, and I think is unique to app-based work, is the extent to which workers don't know each other.
Yep.
Like in the first set of interviews, we're like, hey, so like how many other folks have you had a cup of coffee with another Uber driver? Do you text them from your phone? Do you go to online forums? Like 78% of workers in the first year of this work are like, I've never met another Uber driver, right?
As many as there are too. I mean, there are millions, right? There are like 3 million.
But they're so think of like a pointillism picture, right? And like little dots flashing on and off all night, right? Like it works. This app works, right? Because it puts you where it wants you.
Yep.
And that doesn't want you, Sergio, to be hanging out with Chris, probably on YouTube, okay? Sharing information, understanding that the problems you face are problems of the app rather than your own, you know, character.
Yeah, you cannot take anything that they do to you personally, right? I mean, you have to, first of all, to be successful as a driver, you have to do certain things. You can't just turn the app on like they say and go. It's just not going to work. I mean, we tried to explain this to a lot of people, but what you hit upon is very important, right? I mean, rideshare is a solitary business. Other than having a passenger in the car for 10 minutes or doing food delivery, you're on your own, right? You're just kind of out there, like you said, you're like a little dot. You go on, you go off. But then that's what we're trying to do here, Katie. We're trying to get this community together, get our voices together, and then trust me, it's getting louder. Believe me, it's getting there. But I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're having some success. But as far as those 40 drivers that you just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that? And what the research was and what you found out after talking to those 40 drivers or following them for a certain amount of years?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what you're going to expect, right? Like the two of you will know that many of those workers were not working in the last time that we interviewed them. COVID changed some of that, right? There was a different bump and a shift. A lot of them did have to turn back to gig work, even if they didn't want to, because they lost jobs, they had stresses at home. I think for many of them, Uber worked because it helped them at their time of need. And I think that's what was important to keep in mind, that this was honorable work that they weren't well compensated for. Some of them ended up unscathed, but others took some really hard hits financially or physically.
Yeah, and one thing that we need to mention is that as a driver, when you don't have a support group, I mean, look, driving is not an easy thing to do. First of all, it's physically, mentally, sometimes financially, it's not as great as people make it out to be. But then this is the only thing that some of the drivers can do, and nowadays with the macroeconomic conditions, with inflation going through the roof, right, and they are forced to, literally in millions, to drive. They're not all getting out there and driving because it's great money, okay? But they're doing it, and this is where I see the disconnect, right? And these companies now have all the drivers they need. They probably have more drivers than there's demand.
They love inflation. They love inflation.
Yeah, and the exploitation. I mean, I call it exploitation through the algos, right? It's just running rampant, and that's why we become so successful, because we nail them every single week. They go, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that?" Let's talk a little bit about the algos and the exploitation that you see, and it's in your book. Let's talk a little bit about that.
I mean, and the personalized pay, right? So as a follow-up to this book, right? I mean, we're also following 30 policymakers to ask them questions about, well, why is it you sort of allow this company to operate and allow, Sergio and Chris to get paid different amounts for the very same work? Why did we allow that old adage of equal pay for equal work to go out the window?
Yeah.
And policymakers.
Do you see ultimately, I mean, look, there is legislation happening all over the, country, and there's potentially also federal legislation that's coming up. I mean, where do you see these things going? I mean, are we all going to be employees of these? Am I going to wear an Uber hat and a Lyft shirt one day? Is that what's going to happen?
Sergio, I didn't even know Trump was going to be elected. I know nothing about the future. I'm really bad at predicting, but I do have to believe, right, that like if we look at the history of big oil and big tobacco, that there's got to be enough pressures. I do think that if there is going to be an assessment, I think there are assessments of Uber, it's going to happen not just on the worker front. It's going to happen thinking more broadly about what are its effects on city, congestion, pollution, thinking about the forever chemicals of those wheels on the road all the time, that
Yeah.
they're going to have to be more parties to the table to have some kind of grander response.
Yeah, I mean, you're DC, obviously you're in DC, but we know what's happening now with the congestion fee that's about to come down in New York City. When Uber said, "Oh, we're just going to solve traffic problems," actually, we're going to put many people in a car, and it actually quite the opposite happened, right?
Right.
And pollution is worse, and there's millions of cars idling out there. And now I believe with all the oversaturation of drivers out there, it's gotten worse. Actually, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And you can add on my more recent work since this book ended, right, has been on instant delivery. And we're seeing the very same thing. These workers are struggling to get orders, and they're going across town 6 miles to pick up the burrito to go a mile. I mean, it doesn't make sense financially for them, and it doesn't make sense sort of sustainability wise for a city.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk to you for the whole day, but we have limited time. Obviously, we have our next guest that's going to join us, but I'll give you the floor for the last 3 minutes. I mean, tell us to give our audience some advice. Give us some advice, because I think it's very valuable.
Honestly, when I give audiences advice, right, I tell them, and I'm sure they're things that you guys, I've heard from you, right, which is please tip in cash. Please show your passenger, or if you're a passenger, show your rider what you're paying so we can try to break down some of the opaque, it's really hard to figure out what you're owed, right, if you don't keep track. For a lot of the workers we talk to, we're always asking, what's your breakdown? Keep track of everything as much as you can. And those safety features are really important too in terms of dash cams.
Do you use Uber and Lyft quite a bit yourself in
Do I
DC?
what?
Do you use Uber and Lyft quite a bit?
I don't, but I live in fantasy land. I live in a place with public transportation. I can walk. I mean, this isn't real. Like, this is not Ohio.
Yeah.
But then again, right, on the other hand, there's the argument that it's in these fantasy lands that Uber and Lyft really thrive because they have the wealthy consumer base, and they have a workforce that's underemployed.
Yeah.
And so that's really where a lot of the, profits, if there are profits, but the extraction of value happens for these companies.
Well, I mean, to our audience, here's Katie Wells. I mean, look, I highly recommend the book. If you guys don't win it, don't be cheapskates. Go buy it. It's an amazing book. It is so applicable and relevant for these times that we're in, because all of our drivers complain about oversaturation. I can't get any trips. I can't make any money. I'm like, I understand, but that's the name of the game. But please go get Katie's book. It's extremely well written. You have 2 more authors, obviously, in the book. If you want to mention their names, you go right ahead.
Absolutely. 2 lovely co-authors who I continue to work with, Kafui Atto and Declan Cullen.
Yeah.
And they would also say thank you to Sergio and Chris for letting us share this story. We really are so pleased that you're building community. I think that's the only thing that's going to help us try to think otherwise about how to confront these companies, is doing it collectively. And we hope that the book is part of that chorus.
Yeah, it definitely will be. It's a must read, really, for every gig worker to understand the behind the scenes mentality of how these companies are and how they look at workers, to be honest with you. But let's keep in touch, right? We're here for you. If you need anything from Show Me the Money or Chris or I, we're happy to help, and much appreciated. Thank you for showing up.
Thanks, Sergio. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Katie. All right. Have a great rest of your day. All right. So that was Katie Wells. The name of the book is called Disrupting DC, The Rise of Uber and the Fall of the City. Again, if you want to check out the book, link is going to be in the description. We will give the books away in a little bit. We're going to have our guests go first. And then
the book's name, hold on. The book's name is Disrupting DC, like Washington, DC. It's called The Rise of Uber and Fall of the City. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing book. And I think I sent you screenshots, but I don't know where they went. But we can show the screenshot of the book if you want. And here's that book right there. Disrupting DC, The Rise of Uber and the Fall of the City. This is basically tells you guys the playbook that Uber applies when they go into a city. And they have a playbook and they execute it. How do they execute? They buy politicians. They do whatever they need to do. But, they just move fast, break things. They're the elephant in the China closet. and they're good at it. And in order to battle these types of companies, we need to stand together and battle as much as we can. And that's how it's going to work out.
All right, thanks for watching. That short little clip was from our live stream, Show Me the Money Club with Sergio and myself, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Make sure you subscribe, turn on all notifications so you'll be notified when we go live, as well as all of our awesome content. Make sure to check out this video right here, which will take you to the entire live stream, or check out this video right there. All right, drive smart, everyone.